Charlotte Whitmore was walking along the stone path in the backyard at 6:40 a.m. before anyone else in the house had woken up. On the phone in her hand, she was sorting through emails from her offices across 3 continents, and she examined every one of them carefully. As the founder and CEO of Whitmore Consulting, she had spent the last 11 years of her life making sure nothing and no one ever slipped outside her control. From the chef in her home to the gardener in her yard. The gardener's name was Elias Adeyemi. He was 63 years old. For 3 years, he had arrived every morning at exactly 6 o'clock, working quietly among the roses, never once making eye contact with anyone. The only thing Charlotte knew about him was that his letter of reference had been flawless, and that on the 2 afternoons a week he worked, what caught her attention was the slight tremor in his right hand. She had always seen it as a weakness. There was no room for weakness in the Whitmore household, but his reference had been good enough to earn him the job anyway. That morning, Whitmore's 14-year-old daughter Sophie had been complaining for 3 weeks of a strange ache and fatigue throughout her body. Charlotte had put it down to exam stress. The doctors would later say it was myocarditis, an inflammation of the heart muscle following a viral infection, a rare but potentially fatal condition. That morning, no one knew. Elias began pruning the roses at 8:15. Before heading to the office, Charlotte watched him through the window over one last cup of coffee and thought, why is this man still here? She was paying far too much for just a gardener. Enough, really, to have made him quit long ago. But something, maybe the way he carried his shoulders, maybe that strange calm in his eyes, or maybe the fact that he never spoke, simply did his work and left, had always stopped her from letting him go. Until today, Charlotte called out to the gardener through the window, and it came out sharper than she meant. Why are you running so late? Weren't you supposed to be here at 6? Elias lowered his head and kept working without answering. It was 8:25 when Sophie's scream came from the kitchen. Charlotte dropped her coffee cup and ran. Her daughter was on the floor, lips turning blue, clutching her chest, struggling to breathe. Mom, my chest, she said, and then she couldn't speak anymore. Charlotte's hands shook. She dropped her phone. She tried to call 911, but her fingers wouldn't obey her. The nearest hospital was 12 minutes away. When she finally reached 911, she was told the ambulance would take at least 8 minutes. And for the first time in her life, Charlotte found herself in a moment where her money, her power, her name meant absolutely nothing. The garden gate opened. Elias walked in, pulling off his gloves. He took in Sophie with a single glance. The color of her lips, the rhythm of her chest, the way her eyes couldn't focus, and he spoke in a voice Charlotte had never heard from him. Calm, certain, without a trace of hesitation. Lay her down. Lift her head slightly. You're a gardener, Charlotte said. Almost an accusation, almost an insult, a tone tangled with fear and denial. Elias didn't even look at her. He knelt beside Sophie, pressed 2 fingers to her neck, to her pulse. When I was 26, I worked in a war hospital, he said, his voice still carrying that strange calm. 11 years. Now count her pulse and tell me the number. Charlotte's knees seemed to give out beneath her. She dropped down beside her daughter. Her pulse. It's so fast. It's beating so fast. Around 150, I'd guess, Elias said. It could be myocarditis, inflammation of the heart muscle. Did you call the ambulance? Yes, but they said 8 minutes. Elias, without even glancing at his phone, as if he carried time itself in his body, said, We can hold out 8 minutes if we keep her in the right position and don't panic. Panic is the biggest enemy. You calm down first, then Sophie will follow. Elias's hands moved over Sophie without a single tremor now. Charlotte remembered the tremor she'd seen those afternoons and suddenly understood. It had never been weakness. It was the mark left by a hand that had once stood at an operating table for years on end. A hand finally reminding itself that it had earned the right to rest. Talk to her. Let her hear your voice, Elias told Charlotte. Fear speeds up the heart, and right now we need to slow it down. Charlotte took her daughter's hand. in a moment when motherhood, power, control were all useless, when only love could do anything at all. "I'm here, sweetheart. I'm here. Breathe. Breathe with me, slowly." Elias gently raised Sophie's legs, saying that position would help balance her blood flow. And he told Charlotte, "Keep talking. Your voice is keeping her calm." By the time the ambulance siren began to sound in the distance, the color had returned to Sophie's lips, and her breathing had steadied. As Elias handed Sophie over to the paramedics, he used medical terms so precisely, spoke so professionally, that the young paramedic asked him, "Are you a doctor?" Elias fell silent for a moment. "I used to be? A long time ago." At the hospital, Sophie stabilized, and the doctor said that Elias's initial response, keeping her in the right position, keeping her calm, steadying her breathing, had been critical. "A few more minutes delay and we might be having a very different conversation," the cardiologist said. In the hospital corridor, her hands still shaking from fear and panic, Charlotte turned to Elias, the gardener whose face she had barely looked at in 3 years, whom she had never once spoken to. "Please," she said, "tell me who you are." Elias sat down in a chair in the corridor and began to speak. "My name is Elias Adeyemi. I'm a graduate of medical school. The Civil Wars began the year I graduated, and I never got to live the life I'd dreamed of 30 years ago. For 11 years, I treated bullet wounds, shrapnel from landmines. Then one day, my hands started to shake. The day I stopped trusting my own hands, I put down my scalpel. I never picked it up again. Later, specialist friends of mine called it post-traumatic stress. Back then, people just called it weakness." "Why gardening?" Charlotte asked, her voice fragile. "Because I'm not afraid of the soil. The soil doesn't judge me. Roses grow even in trembling hands. People don't. People want certainty. And I can't even trust myself." Charlotte's eyes filled with tears. "For 3 years, I looked past you. I looked down on you and I treated you badly." Elias looked at her. "Most people do. I'm used to it. Being invisible is its own kind of safety. It's what I wanted too." Sophie recovered. 3 weeks later, she came home. Her heart would still need monitoring, but the danger had passed. Over those 3 weeks, Charlotte noticed something. Elias's hands no longer trembled. It was as if he had sat down on that kitchen floor, a weight he had carried for years. Charlotte, too, had set something down within herself. The illusion that control could solve everything, and the belief that it isn't a person's uniform that matters, but what lies within them. Charlotte found Elias in the garden and sat down beside him, this gardener she had worked alongside for 3 years without ever once saying, "Hello, I want to talk to you about something," she said. "I have a proposal. Maybe going back into practice as a physician isn't possible for you. Maybe you don't even want that. But there's a consultant position at the refugee health clinic in the city. Just to share your knowledge, to teach young doctors about war zone trauma medicine if you'd be willing. You could still keep working in the garden if you'd like." Elias was quiet for a long time. "Why?" he finally asked. Charlotte said, "Because you saved my daughter. And for 3 years I failed to see, or chose not to see, a whole life standing right beside me. I want to make up for that mistake, for my arrogance, not to make things comfortable for you, to give you the respect you deserve." Months later, Elias kept working in the garden and also spent 2 days a week teaching young doctors at the clinic. After she recovered, Sophie would sometimes come down to the garden and sit beside Elias, learning how to prune the roses. One day she couldn't hold back and asked him, "Weren't you scared?" That day, in the kitchen, Elias paused while pruning the roses and answered, "I was scared. But there's a moment between fear and action, and what you do in that moment is what decides who you are. I made my choice in that moment. I set my fear aside and trusted that my hands still knew what to do." Watching them from the window, Charlotte thought back to the trembling hands she had seen for 3 years, and now she understood. That tremor had never been weakness. It was the mark of the heaviest burdens a person can carry, and sometimes the strongest hands in the world quietly prune roses somewhere no one is watching. Welcome to the After Goodbye. Our purpose is to show that kindness wears no uniform, that beneath every hardship there may lie something precious, that no goodbye lasts forever, and that sometimes goodbyes are really just beginnings. If you enjoyed our stories, please like, subscribe, and support us. Thanks for watching.